Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to the third session for Fiqh of Salah. Inshallah, today we will be continuing where we left off yesterday, which was optional prayers. There was one question from yesterday that we'll begin our discussion with. So let me start by sharing my screen. I believe it was number 22 here. When we were discussing the sunnah acts of prayer, one of the questions that came up was that is reciting Surah Al-Fatiha in the last two rakahs, is this referring to fard prayer or all of the prayers? The categorizing, reciting, or the recitation of Surah Al-Fatiha in the last two rakahs, this is in reference to the fard prayers. In terms of the sunnah prayers, you would be required to recite it in all of the rakahs. So here in the fard prayers, it is a sunnah act to do, meaning the last two rakahs reciting Surah Al-Fatiha. In the fard prayers, that is, in the sunnah prayers, it is something you have to do. And that's just the structure of the sunnah prayers in general, as it's structured 2 units by 2 units. All right, let us go. Issues dealing with optional prayers. That is where we left off yesterday. I believe we did the things that are disliked. Yeah. So issues dealing with optional prayers. Bismillah. The first thing that we're going to discuss are the 2 types of optional prayers. Let me see my camera, looking unclear. The 2 types of optional prayers. The first type of optional prayer has a set time. These are generally known as the sunnah prayers. They have a specific time. So for example, the 2 rakahs before Fajr, right? The specific time is that in the time frame of Fajr, prior to praying the Fajr Fard prayers, there is 2 units that you pray, known as the Sunnah of Fajr. So this first category of optional prayers are those prayers that have a specified time, also known as Sunnah prayers. The second category are those prayers that don't have a specific time. So you walk inside of a masjid and you think, let me just pray 2 rakahs. Randomly, or tahiyatul masjid, or entering the masjid, the prayer, the nafil prayer that you can do then, or you're just at home, you're like, I have 10 minutes of free time, let me just pray some nafil prayers. Those are perfectly fine. They don't have a specific time, so you can pray them at any time unless that time frame is impermissible to pray, and we'll talk about those time frames on the same page. The next thing are some of the optional prayers have set times. So just like we were talking about this category number 1, that prayers that have set times, some of them have set times, and these are some examples of them. 2 rakahs before Fajr, there's a set time for this prayer. 4 rakahs before Dhuhr, there's a set time for this prayer. 2 rakahs after Dhuhr, right? There's a set time for that. 2 rakahs after Maghrib, 2 rakahs after Isha, 4 rakahs before Jum'ah, 4 rakahs after Jum'ah. Taraweeh prayers, tahajjud prayers. These are prayers that have a specific time. Sunnah prayers that have a specific time. Now, there are certain times where you cannot pray. You're not supposed to pray, especially additional prayers. Number 1, when the sun is rising, it is impermissible to pray any prayer, including Fajr. So if you missed Fajr, and at the end of Fajr time ends when the sun starts rising, or when sunrise happens. And while the sun itself is rising, it's about 15 to 20 minute window that we are looking at here. It is impermissible to pray, including Salat al-Fajr. You would have to, say you missed Fajr, sunrise right now, you wait that time period, the time frame that it is. I'm not sure exactly what, the precise time frame, but a lot of the prayer time schedules have it. You wait until the time for Ishraq, right? And after Ishraq, you can pray. When Ishraq time comes in, you can pray the Fajr that you missed. But while the sun is rising, you are not supposed to pray. Number 2, when the sun is directly above you. So when the sun is directly above you, you are not supposed to pray either. Number 3, after Asr. And all of these have a specific time. You can search in one of those prayer time schedules. It'll give you the time for these things. Number 3, after Asr until Maghrib. So after you pray your Asr prayer, not the time frame for Asr, after you pray your Asr prayer until Maghrib. Now during this time, the only prayers that should be prayed are your Asr prayer, if you didn't pray that, or any qada fard prayers. So if you missed Fajr that morning, you can pray that during this time frame. All other prayers like Nawafil prayer should be avoided. It's makruh, it's a disliked time to pray additional Nawafil, but you can use this time, it's not haram, it's not impermissible, you can use it to pray the qada prayers, those prayers that you missed, or the fard prayer of that time, meaning Salat al-Asr. All right, any questions before we move on to the next type of prayer, which is Salat al-Witr? Anybody have any questions? Okay. So let's talk about Salat al-Witr. Number 1, Witr is a prayer that is prayed between Isha and Fajr. So the time for Witr is between Isha and Fajr. Sometime after you pray Isha, sometime before you pray Fajr. Ideally, it should be the last prayer of the day. So if somebody gets up consistently for tahajjud, they get up at 3 a.m. every single day, then for that person, they should pray witr after tahajjud every day. They shouldn't pray it after Isha. Now, this is a person who consistently does it. A person who gets up here and there, right, and is not sure if they're going to wake up or not wake up, things like this, then for that individual, right after Isha, you can pray after your nafil prayers and sunnah prayers, you can pray with their prayer and go to sleep. If you wake up for tahajjud, you just pray tahajjud in that case. But somebody who consistently wakes up on a normal schedule every single day, 3 a.m., for that person, they should save Salatul Witr until that time, until after, because it should be the last prayer. So that's the time frame for Salatul Witr. It consists of 3 rakahs and it has an additional dua. It has an additional dua for it. Now, there are 2 ways you can perform witr, 2 famous ways. There's more than 2 ways actually that you can perform it. The first way I'll talk about is the Hanafi method. I don't know which way I do it here. Okay, so the first one I mentioned here is the Shafi'i method on the paper. Now, as I said, most of this course is based on the Hanafi fiqh, but sometimes if it's something you'll so commonly see, I want to introduce it to you that there are 2 valid methods and perfectly fine methods of praying Salatul Witr. The first, we'll just stick to the notes itself. The first is to pray 2 rakahs as a nafil prayer, just 2 as you would do. Say Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Then get up and pray an additional 1 rakah. And this additional 1 rakah, you would start, you would recite Surah Al-Fatiha, another surah, then you go into ruku, Allahu Akbar. Then you come up, Sami Allahu liman hamida, Rabbana wa lakal hamd, and instead of going into sajda, this is the time frame where you recite dua al-qanut. So there are different qunuts that you can recite. Again, for learning a dua al-qanut, you can go to YouTube, type in dua al-qanut, try to find a shorter one in the beginning if you're learning for the first time. If you type in dua al-qanut on Google, it'll give you the original or shorter version as well. So learn one of the dua qanuts that you can recite. If you don't know the entire dua qanut, try to learn 1 or 2 lines, right? And start with that and learn it. As witr itself is a wajib prayer. It is a prayer that is wajib, so you should be praying it. And the dua qanut, recitation of qanut, is not something you can leave on purpose. Remember, we saw it's in the wajib category. If you leave it on purpose, your prayer doesn't count. For the one who doesn't know it, they need to make that attempt to learn it as soon as possible. So start with 1 or 2 du'as, recite that until you learn the entire dua qanut. Now, dua qanut is not that long. Let me see. Okay, so that's the first method. So you would recite the dua, the qanut dua at that time, And then you would go into sajda after the recitation of it and finish that rak'ah. You would sit and say salam salam. You don't do two units, it's just one individual unit. That's three rak'ahs like that. So it's two with a salam, then one separate with its own salam. The second method, which is the Hanafi method, is to pray all three rak'ahs like Salatul Maghrib. So you would, pray two rak'ahs, sit down, right, do the tashahhud, then stand up for the third rak'ah, just like in Maghrib. Now, in this third rak'ah, you would recite Surah Al-Fatiha, you would recite another surah, and after you finish reciting that surah, before going to ruku, you would say Allahu Akbar, and you recite Dua Qanut here. And then when you finish Dua Qanut, then you say Allahu Akbar and go to ruku. So in the Hanafi method, the Dua Qanut is before ruku. In the Shafi'i method, it is after you get up from ruku. These are the two common ways of praying it. Whichever way you learned or you're familiar with, that is perfectly fine to pray it in that way. If you follow the Hanafi fiqh for most of the stuff, try to do it the Hanafi way. If you go to a masjid that's praying in a specific way, it's perfectly fine for you to pray behind that imam in the way that the imam is leading the witr prayer. All right, any questions regarding Salatul Witr or the witr prayers? Okay. Let's move on to the different type of sajdas. Now these are, what we're going to start with is sajda sahu, which is a sajda that is part of prayer if you forget something. And then we'll talk about other types of sajdas as well. So number 1, or number 16 here, sajda sahu, the prostration of forgetfulness, or forgetful sajda, or forgetfulness sajda, however you want to translate it. Sajda sahu is a sajda that is performed at the end of prayer to make up something you have done wrong in prayer. And you can add here that requires sajda sahu. Not everything that you mess up requires sajda sahu. And we're going to talk about the reasons, right? Which is the very next thing. Number 1, if you miss a wajib act in prayer by accident. So if you miss a wajib act of prayer in that prayer by accident, you do sajda sahu. Here's a very quick question, just to kind of refresh our recollection. Number 1, if you miss something that is a prerequisite by accident, do you do sajda sahu? Yes or no? Prerequisite by accident, you missed it. Sajda sahu? I gave you the rule of this while we were doing the prerequisites and then the arkan and then the wajib. So you should know the rule. No, right? If you miss a prerequisite by accident on purpose, you need to repeat that prayer. How about the arkan? You forget a rukn by accident. You forget a rukn of prayer. We said the arkan are takbir tahrima, standing, qira'ah, recitation, ruku, sajda, the sitting position. So if you miss one of these by accident, do you do sajda sahu? Yes or no? I have a yes. Anybody else have any other answers or same answers? You forget a rukn by accident. Okay, the correct answer is no, you don't do sajda sahu. If you forget a rukn by accident, you have to repeat the prayer. The prayer is not valid. So for prerequisites, if you forget it by accident or you leave it out on purpose, the prayer breaks, you need to do it again. For the arkan, the positions we just mentioned, if you forget it by accident or leave it out on purpose, your prayer breaks in both cases. So you can't forget a rukn by accident. If you do, so if I prayed a prayer with no sajdas at all, I forgot to do sajdas somehow. Right? Let's just say I forgot. I didn't do it on purpose, I forgot. Sajda sahu will not make it up. I need to re-pray that prayer. So if you forget a rukn by accident or on purpose, if you leave it out, you have to repray that prayer. For wajib acts, right? Let me scroll up to the wajib category. For these acts of wajib, right? These are obligations, but they're wajib. Both rukn is like foundation. It's kind of like the division of fard and wajib we talked about. So the arkan are fard in this case. The wajib acts here, if you leave them on purpose, your prayer breaks. If you forget them by accident, you can do sajda sahu. So for these wajib acts, you do sajda sahu. Now, how about the sunnah? If I forget a sunnah by accident, do I do sajda sahu? Yes or no? If I forget the sunnahs by accident, like two things I forgot in the sunnahs by accident. I have a no. Any other no's? Or yeses, if anybody has? Okay, that's correct. No, you don't. You forgot something that's sunnah by accident, you don't do sajda sahu. What about if I leave out a sunnah on purpose? Now do I do sajda sahu or not? No, right? Correct. So for the sunnah category, that's why it's important to know which action falls in what category. For the sunnah category, if I miss it by accident or leave it on purpose, I don't do sajda sahu. Now, if you leave things that are sunnah on purpose, it'll diminish your reward from the prayer. Don't think that, oh, there's no effect to the prayer. It'll diminish your reward, but it doesn't require you to do sajda sahu. Sajda sahu is specifically required in these circumstances. Number one, if you miss a wajib act of prayer by accident, that's key. If you left it on purpose, that will not be solved by sajda sahu. Your prayer breaks. Number two, if you add a rukn, not forget, if you add a rukn by accident, somebody did 3 sajdas by accident or something like this, sajda sahu, it's fine in this case. If I forgot all my sajdas, right, I forgot a rukn, I have to repeat that prayer. Sajda sahu will not solve it. Number 3, if you are not sure about the number of rakahs you prayed, you can do sajda sahu in this case. So you're not sure if it's 3 or 4. Now, let me tell you some general rules that revolve around this. I'm going to put it in a very basic form, so it's more detailed than this. I don't want you to think it's this simple, but in a general form, we can just follow these rules. Number 1, if you're debating the number of rakahs, go with the lower number. So I'm praying, I'm like, is this the 4th rakah or 3rd rakah I'm on? Go with the lower number. This is if they're equal. If you're more sure, if you're pretty sure, like you're 90% sure that it's the 4th rakah, but there's a 10% chance that it is the 3rd rakah, go with 90% in that case. So if you're very sure or close to very sure that it's the 4th rakah, go with that. But if you're 50-50, go with the lower number and then do sajda sahu. So if you're not sure about the number of rakahs, go with the number of rakahs you prayed. Now this is somebody who here and there is confused about the number of rakahs. So what if somebody, every single prayer, they just keep getting confused and having these waswasas that, oh, did I pray this many? Did I pray that many? For that person, they just go with the stronger gut feeling, right? So if I'm thinking 90% 4th, I go with 4 and don't do sajda sahu. Or if they're 50-50, go with the lower and don't do sajda sahu. If this is common, if this is every single prayer or like 3 times a day, if this is very common for you, then in that case, you would go with the stronger feeling of the number of rakahs and not do sajda sahu for every single prayer that you are doing this. So these are the 3 times, right? There's no other times aside from this that you need to do it. So the sunnahs that we talked about, you don't need to do it. Let me ask you a question now. Based on these 3 things, I want us to think about it carefully. I'm going to scroll up to the wajib area so we can test our knowledge. So these are the wajibat of prayer. Let's say I didn't place my nose on the ground during sajda. I went down to sajda, the carpet smelled like feet, and I was just like, you know what, I'm just going to put my head on it. I'm not going to put my nose on it. Prayer breaks, or can I do sajda sahu? What do you guys think? I have sajda sahu. Why sajda sahu? You can unmute and explain if you want as well. So, carpet's a little stinky. What's your reasoning? Why are you saying sajda sahu? So, what was the rule? We said the rule for wajib is if you skip a wajib on purpose, your prayer breaks. There's no sajda sahu. If you forget a wajib, right, putting the nose on the ground is wajib. If you forget a wajib by accident, right, forgetfully, then you can do sajda sahu. In this case, you made the decision not to put your nose on the floor because it, has a smell to it or whatever it may be. In that case, you decided not to do it. Therefore, your prayer is invalid. Now, if it's, you're allergic to that smell or there's a strong, I don't think just a foul smell is a valid reason for not putting your nose on the ground. You can just hold your breath or something like this. But if you had a valid reason and couldn't do it, right, and did the best of your ability, then it's a different case. But as a general case, if you chose not to do it, you skipped out a wajib on purpose. If you leave a wajib on purpose, the rule is your prayer breaks. I decide not to recite Surah Al-Fatiha because I just want to recite Surah Qul Huwallahu Ahad because it's shorter. And I decide, Fatiha is going to take me too long. My prayer breaks. I don't have a choice, right? I don't know Fatiha. That's a different story. Okay, here's another question before we move on. This one here. I think I gave this question yesterday as well. So my whole family is ready to go. We're about to head out somewhere. I quickly pray and I go, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, like this, real quick, right? Prayer breaks, or can I do sajda sahu at the end? Can I do that quick 30-second prayer at the end, do 2 sajda sahus, and I'm good to go? What do you think? Prayer breaks or sajda sahu? That's correct. Prayer breaks. Because you purposely, prayer breaks and you need to repeat it. You purposely missed a wajib. Which wajib did you miss? This ta'dil al-arkan, that being in each position with calm and ease, right, to fully go into business. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't pray fast, right? The more calm, the better, but as long as you go into that position and then come out of that position, you're fine. But if you're just rushing through it, you skipped out on this wajib act. All right. How do we perform sajda sahu? So we talked about what sajda sahu is. It's 2 additional sajdas that are at the end of the prayer that make up for something you skipped. And we talked about the things that you need it for. If you miss a wajib by accident, if you add a rukn, if you are not sure about the number of rak'ahs, these things require sajda sahu. How do you perform it? There are 2 ways. There's actually more than 2 ways as well to perform sajda sahu, but 2 common ways. I should have put these ones first. Okay. Let's do this way. The first way of performing sajda sahu, you're doing tashahhud, you make 1 salam, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and then you do 2 additional sajdas, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. If the imam is doing this, you follow the imam in this. Although you might have not missed something, the imam missed something and he's leading in prayer, so you just follow the imam in this as well. But if you miss something yourself, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, do 2 sajdas. Then you do assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah again. The other way of doing this is you finish reciting at-tahiyat and everything, and then after you finish recitation, before you say salam, before going to salam, you do two sajdas. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. And then you sit up and say, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. So that would be before any of the salams. So in the first way that we learned, you're technically doing three salams, right? Because the first way is you finish reciting everything, you say, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. That's the second sajda, Allahu Akbar, right? And then you do two more salams. In the second way that we learned, you do two sajdas before the salam. The first method is the Hanafi method, to do one salam first, then two sajdas, then the two salams. The other method is used by other schools. Now there is another way of doing it. For example, in the Maliki school, sajda sahu is a little more complicated. Depending on what you did wrong, the sajda sahu would change. So they say, for example, all of these ones are present in the tradition, all of these methods of doing it, but they say they're present for a reason, right? If you skip on this type of thing or you add something, this is how you do it. If you leave something, this is how you do it. So they have their own tradition of doing it. In the Hanafi method, it's just that one way. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, two sajdas, and that makes up for it. Now, if, for example, you made more than one mistake or more than one thing that requires it. So let's say you're not sure about the rak'ahs, you were debating that, you went with number 3 instead of 4, right? So that's one reason to do it. And on top of that, you missed the recitation of Fatiha by accident, right? That requires you to do it. You still only do sajda sahu one time, right? One time meaning two sajdas, but only one time. So you don't do Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, right? You don't keep doing all of these sajdas. One time, one sajda sahu, which consists of two sajdas, makes up for all of the mistakes that you missed that require sajda sahu. Okay? Hopefully that's clear. The other thing is, it's not on here, but what if you forget to do sajda sahu, right? So you remembered all the way till the end, but okay, I got to do sajda sahu, I got to do sajda sahu, I got to do sajda sahu. At the end, you're like, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Oh, wait, I needed to do sajda sahu, right? In that case, you can do two sajdas right there and then. But the time for sajda sahu is done. So some scholars say you can do two sajda there and then. Inshallah, it'll compensate something, but the time itself for sajda sahu is done. There is also another method that we're not going to get into, which is doing it after the salam as well. All right. Sajda tilawa. That's our next conversation. 1 second. All right. So sajda tilawa is a sajda that is done when you recite a verse that has, or you hear a verse that has a sajda ayah. It's called a sajda ayah. So sajda tilawa is a sajda that you perform when you recite yourself or you hear live recitation of a verse that contains a sajda. So live recitation, because if you listen to a recording, you don't need to do sajda sahu for the recording. That's what the mainstream fatwa is on, that you don't need to do it if it's a recording. So if you recite it yourself or you hear somebody reciting it, you need to do sajda. How do you perform this? I think I have number 2. You don't need to do it when you hear it from recording. So you need wudu for sajda tilawa. Depending on if you are in prayer or outside of prayer, it will vary how you perform it. So let's break it down, right? Although it's not on here, but let's break it down. If you are in prayer, so I'm in prayer, I'm reciting, and your sajda ayah is in the middle of recitation, not the last thing that you're reciting. So if it's in the middle of recitation, and let's say I'm going to recite the sajda ayah, and then I'm going to continue recitation. In that case, I recite the sajda ayah, I go all the way to sajda. So I recite sajda ayah, then instead of going to ruku, I go Allahu Akbar all the way to sajda. right? Then I come up from the sajda and continue recitation. That is sajda, tilawa, in prayer when it's in the middle of recitation. All of that together. When it's at the end of recitation in your prayer, so you're praying, same scenario, but it's the last verse you were reciting, you just go to ruku. You don't go to sajda and then come up and then go to ruku because you're not reciting anything further. So you just go into ruku, and that ruku will count for your sajda. So you don't need to do a sajda afterwards. That ruku will replace it. This is the fatwa of some of the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, or the ruling of some of the companions, the fiqh understanding of it, that the ruku will count for it, or the narrations that come from them. That's in prayer. Outside of prayer, when you recite a verse of sajda tilawa, or you hear somebody reciting the verse of sajda tilawa, then in that case, let me make one more note. While you're praying, let's say I'm praying and I'm not reciting tilawa, sajda tilawa ayah, but somebody next to me is sitting in the masjid reciting out loud and they recite it. You don't do anything in prayer. When you finish prayer, you can do two sajdas, but you don't do anything in prayer. So if you hear somebody reciting and you're praying and they're just reading on their own, you don't stop what you're doing and go all the way to sajda. That'll break your salah. Okay. Now, outside of prayer, for sajda tilawa, you still need wudu, right? You still need wudu for sajda tilawa. What would happen is if you recite it, you would be required to do sajda facing the qibla. You'd be required to do sajda. If you recite it multiple times in one sitting, you're only required to do it once. If you recite it, same sitting meaning same area. So let's say I'm in this room right now, and I'm just walking around reciting and memorizing this ayah, and I keep reciting the verse, right, in the same sitting, right? So same area, same time frame, right? It's just going to require you to do it once. Now, if I recite it in this room once right now, then once tomorrow, right? That's two different time frames, so I got to do it twice. So multiple times in one area or vicinity or sitting, that will only require one. Same thing if you hear it multiple times in one sitting, that will only require one. So that's pretty straightforward for the most part, sajda tilawa. If there's any questions, feel free to type it in the chat. Sajda shukr. This is the last of the sujood. Sajda shukr is a thankfulness sajda. Now, sajda shukr is literally out of being thankful to Allah for any reason. There's no specific reason, no specific cause, no specific. Whenever you feel thankful to Allah, you can do sajda shukr. You could do it after prayer. You could do it right now. This is the same sajda you see a lot of like soccer players, right? After Muslim soccer players, when they score a goal, they'll go into sajda. That's sajda shukr. So sajda out of thankfulness. For this sajda, you do not need to face qibla. You do not need wudu. It's just a sajda out of respect and thankfulness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It doesn't require anything in terms of facing qibla or in terms of wudu. You can do it at any time. All right. Issues dealing with congregational prayers. Now we're getting into Salatul Jama'ah. Yeah. Let's do Salatul Jama'ah. Yeah, I think we could finish this page at least. All right, Salatul Jama'ah. This is congregational prayers, not Jum'ah, but Jama'ah. So congregational prayers. Number one, you need a minimum of 2 people to pray in congregation, right? Somebody leading and somebody following. 2 people is the minimum. And yes, you can do this with husband and wife at home. 2 people is the minimum. You can do that. That's valid. You cannot pray individually if Jama'ah is going on. So let's say I walk inside the masjid, or that specific prayer. Let's clarify that. So I walk in the masjid, they're praying Salatul Dhuhr, I need to pray Dhuhr as well. I cannot pray individually in that same vicinity while the Dhuhr prayer is going on and I need to pray Dhuhr, right? You have to join the Jama'ah, or for some reason, if you're not trying to pray in the Jama'ah, you have to wait until it's done. So if Jama'ah is going on. Now, let's say I walk in the masjid and they're praying Dhuhr, I need to pray Fajr. that's fine. You can pray your Fajr while they're praying Duha. Um, but the same prayer in the same vicinity, you cannot pray while the congregation is going on. And that's the same thing for starting a second congregation. So I can't go in the masjid and they're praying Dhuhr prayer right now in congregation, and I say, me and my friend, let's start our own congregation. No, you can't pray while the congregation is going on for the same prayer. Number 3, you do not need to repeat your prayer if you prayed and the jama'ah starts after that, but you are allowed to if you want. So if I go in the masjid and for some reason, okay, we'll do that question. Let me see if it comes up. If not, we'll do that at the end, inshallah. So I go in the masjid and I thought prayer was at 1 p.m. I got to the masjid at 1:10. But the prayer, the congregation was at 1:15. So at 1:10, when I came in the masjid, I prayed my Dhuhr prayer. And at 1:15, I see everybody coming in and congregation starts. In that case, I already prayed my Dhuhr prayer. I do not need to repeat it. However, if I want to repeat it, I can. So I can join that jama'ah and I will get the reward of Dhuhr and Nafil because I prayed my individual one and that, and I'll get the reward of jama'ah. So you'll get 3 total rewards. You'll get the reward of Nafil prayer because you now prayed an additional. You'll get reward of jama'ah for your Dhuhr, and you'll have your Dhuhr completed as well. So you're allowed to repeat it if you want, but you don't need to repeat it. You don't have to repeat it. Number 4, you must catch the imam in ruku to catch the full rak'ah. So if you're in ruku, if you catch the imam in ruku, you have caught that rak'ah. If you catch the imam after ruku, you need to make up that rak'ah. So after the imam finishes, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, however many rak'ahs you need to make up will determine what time you caught the prayer. If you caught the prayer at the first Sami Allahu liman hamida, you need to make up 1 rak'ah because you missed the first ruku. After the ruku, it counts as missing the entire rak'ah. If I join, the imam just started and is reciting Surah Al-Fatiha, right? And I join the prayer when he's reciting the surah, I'm good to go. I don't make up anything. If I join when the imam says Allahu Akbar, goes into ruku, I'm good to go. Soon as the imam comes up, Sami Allahu liman hamida, I've now missed 1. The cycle repeats, same thing, Sami Allahu liman hamida, I now missed 2. So when the imam comes out of ruku, you missed it. Okay. When you make up the rak'ahs, I don't want this to get a little confusing, but when you make up the rak'ahs, you make it up as if you were praying your first, second, third. So for example, if you missed 3 rak'ahs from the imam, so you're catching Dhuhr prayer, right? You caught the imam in the last rak'ah. So you caught the full last rak'ah. You missed 3 rak'ahs though. You missed 3 full rak'ahs, you caught the last rak'ah. Now, when you get up, the imam says, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. You stand up to continue. You need to make up 3 rak'ahs, which means you only prayed 1, right? So then after the first rak'ah that you pray, you do the sitting, the shahad, because now you prayed 2. Although separately, you're only praying 1. Get it? So you already prayed 1 with the imam. You count that as your first. And then now you're making up 3. Once you make up your first, that's 2 units. After 2 units, you need to do your tashahhud sitting, and then you make up the other 2. So you would pray as if you would take however many you take from the imam and continue adding. In this way, sometimes if you miss a certain amount of rak'ahs in Maghrib, you can end up doing multiple tashahhuds, way more than required in Maghrib. Okay. If that's not clear, please write in the chat, and we'll elaborate on that at the end as well. Number 5, you cannot start a sunnah prayer if the jama'ah has already started. However, if you happen to be praying your sunnah and the congregational prayer starts, then you should finish your sunnah as soon as possible and join the congregation. I'm going to break this down a little further. So if the congregation has already started, generally, you cannot start your sunnah prayer. You have to do the congregation, to start the congregation. The only exception to this rule is for Salatul Fajr. If Salatul Fajr started and the Imam just went Allahu Akbar, you're allowed to pray 2 rakat sunnah, quickly, not missing your ta'dil arkan, but quickly, um, to catch the Imam, right? If the Imam just started, right? If, put it this way, if you are pretty sure you're not going to miss the Fajr congregation, that is the only time you can start Fajr Sunnah. No other Sunnah you can start. That's why the Fajr Sunnah, out of all the Sunan, are the most important, the two for Fajr. Obviously, Witr is not classified as Sunnah, it's classified as a Wajib. Battery is low. Okay. So that's when you can do the Sunnah prayers. You cannot start it except for Fajr, and only if you are not going to miss Fajr. All the other ones, you can't start it after the Imam has started. Now, if the Imam didn't start, but you came in and you started the Sunnah, and then the Imam starts, in this case, you would see, if you just started your Sunnah prayer, you can break your Sunnah prayer and join the congregation. If you only have like 1 rak'ah left and you'll finish it before the Imam, will get through Dhuhr or the first rak'ah or whatever it may be, you can finish the 1 rak'ah. So you would determine at that point where if you have, or let's say you're in your second rak'ah, you would end it at the tashahhud. When you sit down, you just say Assalamu alaikum, Assalamu alaikum, you would just end it at 2 instead of doing all 4. Right? So you would just see where you are at. So if you just said Allahu Akbar and you're reciting Surah Al-Fatiha and the Imam starts, at that point you can break your Sunnah and join the Imam. If you are in the last sajda, then you would finish your Sunnah and then join the Imam. Or you are in the second rak'ah, you're praying 4 Sunnah, you're in the second rak'ah, sajda. Then you would just sit for tashahhud and say salam, salam. So instead of doing all 4, you would do 2 and then you would join the Imam. All right, hopefully that is clear as well. Issues dealing with people who are not able to pray. So prayer of someone who is sick or injured. Okay, let me just put my charger on. Give me 1 second. All right. Should be good to go now. Bismillah. So, prayer of the sick or injured. If the person is not capable of standing up, so this is a person who's injured, can't stand up, right? I've mentioned this rule before. If they can't stand up, then they would be allowed to sit down and pray. If they can't sit, they would lay down and pray. If that's not possible, they would use their fingers to make movements. If that's not possible, then they would attempt to pray in their mind. But we did this rule, right? What's the 3 conditions for prayer to be an obligation upon a person? Islam, the person has to be Muslim, sanity, and past the age of puberty, right? So as long as these 3 remain, then prayer is fard. And this is the concept that we were talking about. Apply this concept. Do as much as you can. So you would honestly determine your situation. You can consult a doctor, you can consult an imam, or consult both, and assess the most you can do, right? You would know yourself. You have to be sincere with yourself without overexerting yourself, right? You don't want to cause harm. That's why it's important to consult a third party as well. Sometimes you might think, well, I'm not doing enough. Maybe I need to do more. And the imam will tell you, no, this is all you need to do. Don't worry about doing more. Or the doctor will say, well, if you do this, you're going to cause more harm. And in that case, you would not be allowed to cause more harm Islamically to yourself, but rather the Islamic fiqh is structured in a way where it will grant you ease to sit down or to lay down or whatever the situation may be. Okay. And the same thing goes if somebody's sick. So let's say somebody's extremely nauseous and they can't stand up and pray, they would sit down and pray. So it would be a situation by situation basis, on a situation by situation basis. Issues dealing with the prayer of a traveler. Let me see. All right, let's do this and we will end with the issues with prayer of the traveler, inshallah. So, number one, Salatul Qasr. This is the short prayers, the prayer of the traveler. Only the prayers that are 4 rakahs are allowed to be shortened. So the idea behind this is if you travel a certain amount of distance for a certain period of time or under a certain period of time, you are allowed to shorten your prayers. The prayers that you are allowed to shorten are the prayers that consist of 4 rakahs of fard prayers. That is, namely, the Dhuhr prayer, which is 4 rakahs, you can shorten it to 2. The Asr prayer, you can shorten it to 2. The Isha prayers, you can shorten it to 2. Maghrib remains 3 and Fajr remains 2. So this is for the traveler. When a person is traveling, you can shorten your prayer. Conditions for shortening your prayer. There's 2 conditions that need to be met. Number 1, there's a minimum distance that needs to be met to be classified as a traveler. These 2 conditions are the same that apply to the wiping on the socks when we discussed tahara. So if a person, based on these 2 things, is classified as a traveler, they get, does anybody remember the wiping period for the traveler on their socks? From our fiqh intensive tahara last week. Anybody remember? We said for the resident, it's a certain time period to wipe on your socks. For the traveler, it's a different time period. 3 days and 3 nights. Very good. So 3 days and 3 nights for the traveler. That's correct. So number 1, the minimum distance is 48 miles. The minimum distance is 48 miles. Number 2, the person has to intend to stay there for less than 14 days. Intention is key. You're intending to stay there less than 14 days. If you are intending to stay there more than 14 days, you're considered a resident of that area, so you don't shorten your prayer. Now, this I'm going to break down a little further so we can fully understand it. Okay. If I go from here to Washington, D.C., and I'm going there for 3 days, traveler or not traveler? You can type it in the chat or unmute yourself. It's going to be rapid fire questions. Traveler or not traveler? Going to Washington, D.C. from here for 3 days. Am I a traveler for those 3 days or no? All right, traveler. All right, so just run these 2 tests. Number 1, is it more than 48 miles? Yes, Washington, D.C. is. Number 2, am I intending to stay less than 14 days? Yes. Yes, yes equals traveler. What about if I go from here to Middletown and I'm staying there for 5 days? Traveler or no traveler? I'm in Newark, by the way, right now, just in case you're wondering distance. Newark, Delaware. No, not traveler, right? Why? I don't meet the minimum distance, right? It's definitely not 48 miles. You're correct. It's not. So from here to Middletown is not 48 miles, therefore no miles. I'm staying less than 14 days, but no miles. The mileage hasn't been met, so no traveler. What about if I'm going from here, now it's going to get a little harder. I'm going from here to Chicago for 10 days. And then after the 10 days, I'm going to go to California for another 10 days. And then I'm coming back to Delaware. In Chicago, am I a traveler? Yes or no? And then in California, am I a traveler? Yes or no? So let's start with Chicago. From here, I'm going straight to Chicago. I'm staying there for 10 days. Am I a traveler? Yes or no? Yes, that's correct. From Chicago, I'm going to California. Am I a traveler? Yes or no? That one's a little harder. So from here to Chicago, I'm going and I'm staying in Chicago 10 days. Then from Chicago to California, I'm staying in California 10 days. California, traveler? What do you guys think? The answer is yes, I am a traveler for California for all 10 days. Anybody wants to attempt at why I'm a traveler for all 10 days in California? Okay. Because I didn't stay in Chicago for more than 14 days. So I'm on the move. I moved somewhere else greater than 48 miles. If I went from Chicago to a suburb of Chicago that's 20 miles, then my days will still be added up. And 20 days would have been over 14. But because I only stayed in Chicago 10 days, and then I went to California, which is greater than 48 miles that we talked about, or definitely Chicago to California is 48 miles, right? And I meet the less than 14-day requirement in California, I am still a traveler. Then from California, I go to Hong Kong, another 10 days, still a traveler. From Hong Kong, I go to Pakistan, another 10 days, still a traveler. From Pakistan, I go to India for another 10 days, more than 48 miles away, still a traveler. From there, I go to South Africa for 10 days, still a traveler. As long as greater than 48 miles, less than 14 days, you're still constantly a traveler. So if you're actually traveling like this, you're still a traveler as long as you're not in that one area, 48 miles, for more than 14 days. All right, hopefully that's clear. So let's say somebody's going, and this is a very common question I get. Somebody's going to Pakistan or somewhere to visit family, and they're going on a vacation for a month, but they will not be in one location for a month. So they're going to be landing in Karachi, and then they're going to go stay in Karachi for 5 days, and they're going to go to Islamabad for 10 days. Then from Islamabad, they're going to go, let's say, somewhere else that's 100 miles away for another 5 days. This person is a constant traveler. They're going to be doing qasr the whole time. They're not considered a resident. Okay. Um, Hopefully that is clarified. Now, there was one more point that I wanted to make, but it slipped my mind. Um, oh, okay. This is the point. So let's say I go from here to Chicago and I intended to stay there for 10 days, right? Traveler or not traveler? I went from here to Chicago, staying there, intending to stay there for 10 days. Traveler or no traveler? What do you guys think? That's an easy one. From here to Chicago, 10 days. Traveler, right? Now, on the 10th day or ninth day, I decide to stay for one more week. I'm there. Everybody there convinces me, just stay another week, take off. They don't need you at Juma and Dover. Don't worry about it, right? Take off, stay another week. Um, am I a traveler or not for these 7 days, these additional 7 days? Hmm. This is another nuance that I'm trying to bring out. The answer is yes, I am a traveler. As long as my intention is not to stay for 14 days. So although I will end up staying for 14 days, right here, the person has to intend to stay there less than 14. So my initial intention was 10, right? Then at the 10th day, I intend to stay for 7 more days. My intention is still less than 14 days in a total span, right? If at that 10th day I intended to stay another month, then I wouldn't be a traveler, or 15 days, then I wouldn't be a traveler. But I intended to stay another 10 days, 11 days, 12 days, right? I am a traveler because my intention didn't exceed 14 days from that point in time where I made the intention. So the first intention I made was 10 days. And this is you yourself know your intention. It's not something you could cheat. It's not a something that you write like I'm going to stay there 13 days, but in my head I know I'm staying way longer than 13. You can't cheat yourself on this, right? The intention is just what you know. If you know that you're going to stay there for that time, then that's what it is. All right. The last thing, although we are finishing time in 1 minute, I just want to do this last mas'ala. What if a person prays in congregation or leads the congregation while he is a traveler? Does he pray all four or just two? If he prays in congregation, then he just follows the imam and prays all four. So if if the if you're, let's say you travel to Chicago and you visit one of the masjids in Chicago, and you pray behind the imam, you don't end your prayer at 2. You continue and pray the entire prayer with the imam. The second scenario is if you're leading the prayer. So you go there and lead the prayer. In this case, okay, so this here is not the Hanafi answer. The Hanafi madhab is you pray 2. The Hanafi madhab is you pray 2. The Shafi madhab is, and I'll change this for next time. The Shafi madhab is you can choose whether to pray 2 or 4, or the Jamhur, the other madhabs. The reason why I put this here is depending on the situation, there are different opinions or fatwas out there, but the traditional Hanafi madhab is that the person leading should lead only 2 and not 4. It's not a choice. And that's because in the Hanafi madhab, shortening your prayers itself is not a choice, it is something you have to do. The Hanafi madhab sees the ruling of shortening your prayer as an original ruling. So meaning when a person is classified as a traveler, they have to pray 2 rakahs. That's what's fard on them, to pray 2. It's not a choice between 2 or 4. Rather, what's fard is the 2 rakahs. So because they classify it like that, this here that when they're leading the congregation as well, they have to do 2 because it's fard for them to do 2. Whereas the other madhabs classify it as a choice, and they allow you to do 4 or 2. So this ruling, you can still take it, that if you're leading, you can do 4 or 2. It's still better to do 2. And in the Hanafi madhab, there's the mainstream opinion, which is you have to do 2, and there's fatwa out there that say, in the Hanafi madhab as well, that say that you can do 4. But the main, like I said, the main opinion of the madhab is 2. All right, let's end our session here, but let's do some Q&A that's already mentioned inside the thing.